Welcome back to A Leaflet Drops in Shoal, a podcast brought to you by Miracause Media. I'm Rabbi David Minkus. If you haven't heard episode 1 and 2 yet, you'll want to go back and start from there. 2 weeks after I found the leaflets in our Sidorim, I sat down with the person who put them there. I watched the security camera waiting for her to come, not knowing what to expect. And she was late, so I was left to wonder if she reconsidered meeting with me. But then,
I walked in, and I think, the mentality that I had walking in was this poor man. You have been, I could only imagine at that point, what you had been dealing with.
this is Zahava, though that's not her real name or her voice. Because this is such a sensitive issue, we both decided to keep her identity anonymous. Zahava's voice has been replaced by an actor. When she walked into the meeting, she was surprisingly calm. I'm thankful to her for that.
I really had no idea what sort of solution would be proposed, if there would be one, if it was don't come back here kind of a thing. My impression of this whole thing was that you had this nervous energy. You got to get your context out. And so I was all right. I felt very ready to hear what you had to say about the whole thing.
I shared how unsettling it was to find these leaflets. I told her what it was like to be caught off guard, to be made to feel unsafe in the one place I should have felt safe and secure. I told her about the hurt community members, those who were scared, as well as those who thoughtfully advocated on her behalf. I was honest about the time that this took up that I thought could have gone to more important communal issues.
And then I was oh, okay, maybe there's a space for me to also share mine.
Zahava told me the long story of her conversion to Judaism, which was where there was a meaningful connection to what had taken place the previous weeks. Far more than I realized. What led you to want to be Jewish? Was there an experience or a person or a community that inspired that decision?
Wow. I was just surrounded by Judaism in a really casual way my whole life. My best friend was Jewish. I came over for a Shabbat dinner. My high school boyfriend was Jewish. I came over for Sukkot and Passover. I felt really proud to be a goy who knew what Sukkot was. But then I got to college and all of that kind of disappeared. And I really felt an absence of something in my life. And it wasn't until a very close friend of mine converted to Judaism that I noticed how, I guess the right word would be jealous. I remember hearing in my head this sentence of, ugh, I wish I could do that, And then it occurred to me a few months later that, oh, actually, you can do that.
But her interest in Judaism definitely did not stem from Zionism or connection to Israel, elements that many Jews, like me, find foundational to our identity.
I believe it's a settler colonial project, and I don't support that ethically.
Even so, early on in her conversion process, she understood that if she wanted to become Jewish, she would need to reckon with the hold the state of Israel has on Jews in the American Jewish establishment.
Yeah, even the word Israel, even in the liturgy, was, jarring to me. I was are we talking about the nation of Israel, or are we talking about the people of Israel?
In 2021, she joined a conversion class offered online by a large synagogue.
I was really excited to, nerd out about the Jewish calendar and other things that I was reading about, Midrash and Torah and texts.
For a young person looking to find her place in the world, it seemed like this was it.
They really made, a big effort to bring in outside people to kind of talk more about Judaism. They also, brought in other converts who had been through the program to talk about what it was like to pick your own name or other experiences of conversion.
Aside from her personal connection to the beliefs, the history, and the traditions of Judaism, I asked Zahava how she related to its people, how she sees herself in the greater community of Jews.
I would say I relate to it a little bit like I relate to my blood relatives. Like, there are some people that I talk to that I'm very fond of, and we have, like, community together, and then there are people that I just don't see eye to eye on, but I can still appreciate their humanity. And then there are people who I feel like rejected me personally.
It was actually one of those moments of rejection that struck me the most.
So this was the summer of 2022. I had reached the end of the class. There was like a little exam at the end to make sure you had like read and understood the information. Pretty standard.
Questions like,
which of these symbols is a Heckscher symbol, right? And one of them was like a University of Chicago symbol. And I was like, okay, yeah, these are like easy questions, right?
But the questions did get harder and more personal.
And toward the end, they had, like, describe a mitzvah that you plan to fulfill. And I talked about Hachmeset Orchim and how I felt, like, really devoted to radical hospitality and all of that. And then there was an essay question about the Shoah. And I talked about how that feels really difficult to come away with a lesson from that, because I think that I don't want to make suffering necessary in order to learn something. Then the last question was, describe your relationship to the state of Israel. And yeah, so I answered the question as honestly as I could. I'm an anarchist, so I believe in people's ability to take care of each other through autonomous networks. I think that there are systems that are built in order to catch people and keep them safe, but people slip through the cracks. And that's kind of the feature of the system. And so we kind of already collectively work to support each other. I think about that in terms of what anarchism is to me, because I know that other people are afraid of what that means, but it also means that I don't support the existence of nation states in general. And so I tried to frame it that way in my relationship to Israel. It's just sort of I believe it's a settler colonial project, and I don't support it in the same way that I don't support the existence of the United States, you know? So anyway, I submit the essays, and then a couple of months pass. I get the confirmation email for my Beit Din date.
A Beit Din is the final step of conversion, where 3 rabbis decide the religious status of the convert.
And then 30 minutes later, I get an email saying, we have to postpone. You need to meet with this rabbi.
A rabbi she had heard a lot about.
This rabbi is he has worked with AIPAC. He's very passionate about his activism for Israel.
In her eyes, as an anti-Zionist trying to convert to Judaism,
he's a scary guy.
She didn't quite know what to do.
So I reached out to my friends. They reached out to other people who went through the program, who were also anti-Zionist and who also left the program because they have a way of softly excluding anti-Zionists from their conversion program.
From what she heard, she was sure that being honest with her beliefs on Israel would be the end of her conversion.
So I declined the meeting. I declined going forward with the process, and I just scrambled together a Beit Din with my friend who happened to pull together 3 rabbis for me.
So, in the end, Zahava found another pathway to convert. But it still felt like a rejection mirroring others in her life, and it left a big impression.
So I experienced that email as a flat-out rejection of my validity. Because I had poured my heart out into that class, and I'd been on my path to conversion for years at that point. And the fact that it needed to be put on hold at all felt to me just like where I was at just was not acceptable for them. And I couldn't lie, I did not want to lie in order to convert. That feels really, really invalid. I would regret that for the rest of my life.
Thank you for sharing that. First, I really admire your integrity, your willingness you wanted to do this, but you're going to do it right for yourself, but also for them, to honor, even not agreeing with them, but honor that. I appreciate that. That's real integrity. Do you remember how you first heard about what happened on October 7th, and what were you thinking?
Yeah, I was with my partner in their apartment. We were coming off of the high of Sukkot, and I had just come back, I think, from setting up the space that we were going to daven in the next day. And he said, fuck. He showed me what he was looking at on his phone, and my stomach dropped. I just started crying immediately. I felt really horrified at the civilian casualty. And I knew what it meant for the community here. I knew that it was going to be very difficult to navigate being in Jewish spaces together, because this particular neighborhood is so divided on the politics of Zionism. And I knew that thousands and thousands of Palestinians would die in the oncoming weeks. I was terrified. I was fully expecting the full-scale military invasion and an attempt to wipe Gaza off the map, which Israeli politicians have said is their goal, right? I felt so powerless. It was sickening. It was so awful to feel like I knew so clearly what was wrong, and to not feel like anybody understood that. Anybody that held a position of power in my community, I guess.
Of course I understood this feeling of dissonance she's describing. Yet I, and most others, would not respond the way she did. And so I wanted to understand how this powerlessness led to putting leaflets in the Sidurim without permission. She says it stemmed from something that happened at our services a week or two earlier.
I was here with my friends, and I know all of them are anti-Zionists, and I know that this minyan prays for the state of Israel every Saturday, and it had been my custom to walk out during that. And this time it started, and I felt the need to say something in response to it. It felt intolerable to me to sit and silently walk out as though I were going to the bathroom, I felt that a walkout didn't feel like enough of an expression of disagreement. And so I got up and I walked over to that corner, and I didn't feel like I could leave, but I didn't feel like I could stay. And then I heard the like asking God to help the IDF in their endeavors. And that was like, it just really, I felt the rejection all over again from like my conversion process. I felt like ashamed of myself for kind of standing by and not saying anything of like, this is horrifying. Can we please not pray on behalf of a military body in general? And it struck something deep in me as well. I have some trauma, some childhood trauma from being like rejected because I'm different, you know? And so I was like kind of reliving that experience over there on the floor. And it kind of pushed me out, almost like out of my body a little bit. And I just remained outside of my body for like 2 weeks. And the only thing I could think about was like wanting to make art about what I was just like, about what I was feeling.
To her, it was art. Not a leaflet or a flyer, but a zine. A way to express her pain and desire to connect with the community. At first, she shared it with friends who shared her views.
People are like, this is really beautiful. This is exactly what I'm feeling.
And she decided to go one step further. Can you describe the scene of when you put the zines in the Sidurim? Like, what were you thinking when you walked in the building? You know, like, do you remember?
I cannot overemphasize how little I thought about. Like, yeah. So I just kind of like stood there at the table full of Sidurim, and I was like thinking about like, where might they go? And the Sidurim were like laid out on the table, and I was like, okay, that seems like the right spot, I guess. I was standing in the atrium thinking like, actually, do I want to put it like around Musaf? Do I want to put it where the prayer for the state of Israel might be, to kind of, you know, make visible that like political juxtaposition? Or like, do I want to put it in Shacharit? I figured that everybody would know instantly that it was me. I didn't feel like the desire to hide. So I like tucked maybe 10 or 15 into the Sidurim, and then I came upstairs and I laid a few on the chairs up there, and I left. I think it maybe took 15 minutes, but it didn't feel like, it's not like my heart was pounding or anything like that. I was just like, okay, I did the thing that I feel like I needed to do. Because I was so outside of myself, I also like wasn't really here in the present, considering how it would be received.
Did that help you come back into your body? Did you feel like a sense of relief or pride or?
I honestly don't remember the time in between when I planted the zines and when I was like, I guess, kicked out of the building, because like getting kicked out of the building also, it was another out-of-body experience. I felt relief in the sense that to be an anti-Zionist in the Jewish community, it's a relief to like just be open about your politics, I think, because there's so much dancing around the topic that we do collectively. So on that level, it was a relief.
What were you hoping for?
What I had wished, I think, is to have brought the the presence forward of the anti-Zionists in this community, because there are a lot of us. I wonder sort of if Zionist Jews feel like they fundamentally don't understand anti-Zionist Jews and couldn't possibly, talk to one. What would they say? They're kind of like this boogeyman, kind of like how anarchists are the boogeyman of, the political sphere. And I guess in a way I succeeded because I'm here on this podcast. But it came at a really big cost to my mental health.
Before our meeting ended, I knew that something had shifted in me. Not in my political beliefs, but in my conviction that exclusion was the right choice.
You said that you were, very supportive of me, returning to the building as soon as possible.
And this is how I felt, because we sat down and listened to each other, face to face. You owned what you did. You regretted how you did it. You put me in a place where I could have empathy. I don't care what people believe. I really don't. But if we can't see the other person as an individual with a story that is worth hearing and worth sharing, then we got nothing. The board agreed with me, and by Tuesday morning, Zahaba was back at her job in the building. What felt like an earthquake had been downgraded to a speed bump, at least for us at Road Faith Tzedek. It turns out there was room for both of us under our big tent. I've sat with this story for months, wrestling with what it means. One moral for me is that concepts move us far less than people do, but we need the opportunity to meet, the chance to talk, and only then does this become true. I also see what happened here as a microcosm of a larger rift within the Jewish community and beyond. There's a generational divide and an ideological one too, one that sometimes feels impossible to bridge. Red lines are drawn, labels thrown around, and this can override any desire to hear from the other. Sure, the Jewish community has always been full of disagreement. 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? But for a people that strives for debate, we've also become experts at policing language, scrubbing our communities of the speech and the people who make us uncomfortable. Anti-Zionism within our communities is nothing new, and it's not going anywhere. If we cannot allow for thoughtful discussion around Israel, especially with younger people, then our communities will only fracture further. We can bury our heads in the sand and cast them all as radicals, unworthy of being heard. For some of us, that has been the strategy. But we need to ask our communal leaders, ask ourselves, is it working? This story suggests listening may be a more compelling communal muscle to flex. I think a better political tool as well. I know many people, perhaps those blocking traffic or occupying college campuses, are not looking to thoughtfully engage. But Zahaba was, and she's not alone. Let me be clear. I am a Zionist. I believe in the dream of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel, with all of its beauty and imperfection, and my heart breaks knowing others do not acknowledge that dream or its reality. And still, we all need to hear Zahaba's story. We cannot block out her truth, just as we demand that others hear ours. And we need to find meaningful responses beyond the labeling of anti-Semitism. In fact, all of these terms, Zionist, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic, maybe they're not very useful on their own. My Zionism may not be the same as yours. To really understand requires explanation, which means having a conversation. This is hard work. If it was easy, we would be known as something other than B'nai Yisrael, the children of Jacob. To be Jewish, as with the biblical story, is to wrestle, yes, with God and tradition, but perhaps, more importantly, with each other, with our brethren, a people birthed through the painful struggle for meaning. Well, that's how I see it anyway. But this isn't only my story. What do you see as a moral of the story?
One of them is that when there's not a crisis, it's easy to be nice to everybody. But if when there's a crisis, we start to police our borders and, cut people off, in certain crises, right, you see who people really are. You see what organizations really are. And the other moral of the story, I think, and probably more significant for regular people that are listening, is that third point on the triangle needs to speak up, that kind of moderate, thoughtful position actually represents a position. And I think that people like Maimonides agree and would talk about the golden mean as a stance, not just a place in the middle. The reality is that most people don't speak up ever on any position, right, left, or third. So I think really the call out there is for people who might have the capacity to lead that third way to step up and lead.
If you go back to that Shabbat without losing your integrity, would you do it the same way? Would you do it differently?
I think I would do it differently. I probably would have talked to you sooner.
What kept you from talking to me?
I really thought that, I would just be, yelled out of the room. And I think I would have, also talked to more congregant members, the ones that I, sit at the Kiddush table with about it. That's a level of discomfort that I'm willing to sit through, of bringing up a difficult topic and fielding other people's emotional responses. I feel a sense of obligation to the Jewish people. I think about our culture as something that's actually kind of young in the history of humanity, and I like to wonder what sort of cultural things we let go of and which ones we choose to pick up or keep.
Now it's your turn, because this is also your story. In listening thoughtfully for these last few weeks, you've become a part of it, but you were probably a part of it long before this podcast aired. And so I want to hear from you. What do you think the moral is? What did you learn? Email me at hello@merkaz.community. If you send a voice memo of your thoughts, we might use it in an upcoming episode. God willing, the war will end. God willing, our hostages will be returned. And God willing, the people of Gaza will have a just peace and a real future. You and I can't make that a reality. But maybe we can have the grace and humility to hear from those we don't agree with. Even those whose words seem to cut to our very core. Sometimes all we can do is listen. And, as Dan said, the real change comes later. Let's hope that it does. Thank you so much for listening to Merkaz Media's first limited series, A Leaflet Drops in Shul. I'm David Minkus, the founder of Merkaz. I want to thank our producer, Joel Shupak, who helped make this idea a reality. It was a pleasure and an honor to tell this story with you, and thank you for giving me the tools to tell it. I learned as much from your talent as I did from your heart. I want to thank Hannah Kaiser for helping in dozens of areas and for indulging my Alex Bloomberg dreams. I also want to thank my wonderful community, Rodfait Tzedek, for being the kind of place where I can tell this story, especially our brave leader, Mark Sorkin. Your fingerprints are all over this journey. Visit our website, merkaz.community. That's MERCAZ.community to learn more about us and subscribe to our newsletter. In addition to producing podcasts, we also host in-person events. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Get in touch with me directly by emailing me at hello@merkaz.community. Thank you to Sarah Bellingham, our voice actor. Music provided by Blue Dot Sessions. And thank you, our dear listeners. Write to me and stay tuned for more podcasts and events from Merkaz.